The rivalry is back on.
Welcome back to the Cody Fogger podcast, and we are doing another preview podcast as the Colts play the Bengals. They travel to Cincinnati on Thursday to play their final preseason game, and we thought that we'd do this podcast because I think Derek and I both agree we're kind of over the preseason at this point, but there are a few points that we wanted to talk about really fast to get you guys kind of primed for what to look for, even if some people may not really want to watch this game, but if you do watch this game, I want to give you a few things that you could potentially be watching for. So Paris Campbell returned, Colts second-round pick Paris Campbell, wide receiver, returned to practice, I believe, on Monday, and he plans to play on Thursday, according to Frank Reich. And so that'll be interesting to see. You know, Campbell's been out for weeks and weeks with this hamstring injury, but it looks like that's no longer an issue, according to Campbell. And so I think that this is going to be a good thing for Campbell, even though some people are potentially like, why would you play Campbell right off of an injury? But I think it's good and it's important for Campbell to get some meaningful snaps in. You know, if Jacoby Brissett plays, it's important for him to get some chemistry with Brissett because he's just been out for so long, and it'd be just good for him to get back into a rhythm for the first regular season game when the Colts travel to Los Angeles. Derek, why are there any other reasons why you think it's good for Paris Campbell? What do you think, I guess, some good things for Paris Campbell playing? What do you think could be some of the drawbacks for Paris Campbell playing on Thursday?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested. I might actually be going to this game since I live close to the Cincinnati area right now. I might end up actually making it there if I can get some tickets, which shouldn't be an issue. I might end up going. But anyway, even for the good and bad for Paris Campbell, obviously everyone is saying don't play him. There's just injuries that have a problem. Obviously, I feel that is a big issue. I don't want him to really play that much. I'm very conflicted by it. I really don't want him to play, but at the same time, I need him to get the experience. Of course, you know, they'll have a whole another week to get him acclimated into the system. How much they actually play the starters, I don't know. But again, it is good for Paris Campbell to get that game time speed. And that is something that he needs to get back into the groove of it all since he has missed some significant amount of time. He has missed all of training camp. So I really hope that he does go out there, gets a couple drives, and is used very well and does what he needs to do. But at the same time, I really just hope he doesn't get injured. I don't want any injuries at this point. You know, us Colts fans have had a lot to deal with over the last week. I think it's if we can just get out of this game with no injuries and just get some more experience for these starters, that would be pitch perfect for me. But I want to see what Frank Reich might do to get Paris Campbell involved. What all is he going to let him do?
Yeah, and I think a big thing for me, I totally get where you're coming from, Derek. I think the big reason why I want to see Paris Campbell out there is simply because I want to see what he's like against, you know, a team that not the same team, not his own team. I want to see what he's like out there getting live reps, getting live bullets. Even though it's a preseason game, I think it's important and it's valuable for Paris Campbell to get out there and have some real game snaps. So that's my argument, but I totally get where you're coming from where, man, it seems like the Colts have just dealt with some injuries, and I know it's not been as bad this year as maybe in last year and in previous years, but it's still something, and it's been a heavy week, I know, for Colts fans, so it wouldn't do well to see Paris Campbell get injured in a meaningless preseason game. So I totally get where you're coming from. So some other positions that I think are going to be interesting to watch for this preseason game, it's really going to be a couple guys on the back end of the roster that I think will need to have strong performances in order to make this final 53-man roster. And we can start on offense first. We can talk about the wide receivers. I mean, obviously, we've talked about it, Derek, a lot on this podcast. That's one of the most interesting and deep positions, even with Reese Fountain going down with injury. It's still a pretty deep position. You know, you got to think you got Deon Cain, Devin Funchess, Paris Campbell, we just talked about. And then I'm missing somebody, Chester Rogers. You got to think he's going to make the roster as well. So really that battle for 5, and even if the Colts keep six wide receivers, then, you know, who makes those things? So I have a couple guys who I think need to have strong performances. One guy that we've talked a lot about and we really think the Colts like a lot is Krishawn Hogan, who I think has had a pretty solid camp, pretty solid preseason games. And I think he's right there in the mix for that number 5, number 6 wide receiver position. Another guy is Marcus Johnson, who, if you don't remember who he is, he was traded last year, I think near the end of the preseason, from the Philadelphia Eagles. and he had a strong game. Remember, he really was starting to come on in that New York Jets game, and that's unfortunately when he went down with injuries. So he's another one to watch. And then there's just some other guys. I think those are the main two guys, and maybe I'm missing somebody, Derek. Maybe you can tell me the other guy I'm missing if I am missing one. But I think those are the two main guys who are battling out for that number 5 position. And so, yeah, what are you looking for both of those guys? And then is there another guy potentially in the mix that you think that I missed?
Yeah, I think Krishawn Hogan definitely has kind of been making a big, if I want to say, storyline for the Colts. You know, he's been out there playing very well. I think Penny Hart definitely has a chance to make his way in there because of his speed. I think at the end of the day, though, Johnson definitely is the guy that I think the Colts are going to want to bring in for that last spot if they have anyone, because Johnson does have a lot more of that experience, and he has the ability to come in there and provide some minutes off the bench. I think ultimately that's what puts Johnson where he is in the lineup. Whether or not any of these guys make it, we'll have to see. But if I had to put my money on it right now, I would say that Johnson is the main threat for them right now.
Yeah, and I just remember the guy who I forgot to add is Zack Paschal, who I think has a legit shot to make this roster as well, especially with his work as a gunner on the Colts special teams. I think the Colts like him a lot. I think he showed some flashes last year in the games that he was able to play, and I think he's a potential player to fight for that spot as well. So sorry, Zach. You're definitely a player who I'm going to be watching this preseason game to see if he breaks out, if he has a really good game. And it's going to be an interesting battle for that number 5 position. Another position that's really, really loaded that we've looked at is the corner position. And that position, I mean, really, I think there's a lot of players who are locks to make this roster as well, with Kenny Moore, who unfortunately just broke his thumb, and Pierre Desir, obviously, Quincy Wilson, and Rock Ya-Sin. And I think it's kind of similar to the wide receiver position. It's like, do you keep 5, do you keep 6? I would tend to think they keep more now, that, especially after they cut Matthias Farley. So they'll probably keep 4 safeties now instead of 5, so that can maybe free them up to keep an extra corner. And you got guys like Nate Hairston, you got guys like Chris Milton, even Marvell Tell and Jalen Collins. You got a slew of guys who are battling for 1 or 2 positions. So I'm going to be interested to watch what those guys do. And I think all those guys really had solid games last week against the Bears. None of them particularly stood out. None of them particularly played badly. And so this preseason game, I think, will really be telling to see who makes that final back into the roster spot, the corner position. Derek, who's your favorite right now to make the roster for the Colts corners, and why?
Yeah, I think the guy that will possibly make that last roster spot is Nate Hairston. He's been here for a little bit now. He's had some playing time, and he also plays on special teams, which we know is a big plus when it comes to the Colts and the way they bring people into this roster. If you can play special teams, then you'll stick around for a little while longer. I think ultimately Nate Hairston is just a guy that's more prototypical of what they're looking for, and I think that he's a great role player. He's had some time in the system, like I said before. I think ultimately that is what sets him apart from some of these other corners. We could go more in depth with safety at another time, but ultimately I think for corners, Nate Hairston just has a more compelling argument for why he should be on the last roster spot.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with you with Nate Hairston, simply because he can do all the things you said. He can actually be decent on the field, and he can play special teams, which is huge in this league. But I got to think, he'll probably be the 5, and then you got the 6. I would probably say Chris Milton right now, because he can also play special teams for you. And so, yeah, I'll probably go with him for my number 6 if the Colts do indeed keep 6 corners, or who knows how they're going to do it. But number 5 would probably be Nate Hairston right now, and number 6 would probably be Chris Milton for me. And then the final position that we are going to talk about, the young pass rushers. So you think Kemoko Turay, Tyquan Lewis, and Ben Banogu. And Kemoko Ture's had a very strong, I think, preseason in the last couple weeks especially, and a strong camp. And I think he's done a lot of good stuff. And now it's all about consistency, like we've talked about with these young players. Can they string together back-to-back games and back-to-back practices? And that's a big thing for Turay. And then Banogu, I know the Colts have been really high on him. It seems like ever since he was drafted, the hype's just kind of gone down since then. But the Colts believe in him. He's a young pass rusher. He's definitely got all the ability in the world to be a very good pass rusher. And so I'm watching for him. And then Tyquan Lewis, I feel like he's been very quiet this season. I haven't heard a whole lot about Tyquan Lewis, but he's not starting right now. He's a reserve behind, I believe he's the 3 technique reserve behind Denico Autry. So it'll be interesting to see his development now in year 2. Now that he's had a healthy offseason and healthy spring, and now he's entering the season fully healthy. Last year I think he broke his foot or something like that, and so he was out for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I think he really didn't come back till like near the end of the season, and then obviously he went down with another injury. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those guys bring for Toure and for Lewis in year 2, and for Banagou in his rookie season, seeing what they bring. And I think this preseason game will be a good showing again to see, can they consistently bring the pressure? Can they be consistent players? Because that's such a big thing for young players. And so, yeah, those are my 3 guys to watch for this preseason game along the defensive line. And there are some other guys like Grover Stewart and some others, Jihad Ward. I'm just interested to watch how these young players continue to develop in this Colts defensive front. And, it's going to be a very interesting preseason game to watch. I don't even know if I'm going to watch this game, honestly. I might tune in for a little bit, but if you're really a diehard Colts fan, this is probably a game you're going to watch, because it will determine probably who's going to make the final 53-man roster. And I believe the Colts have to make those roster cuts on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to double-check on that. But, yeah, so it's going to be an interesting game to watch for sure. Derek, do you have any closing thoughts, man, on this team and on everything that you're watching for in week 4? If you do indeed go, what are some things you're looking forward to here in week 4, the final game of the preseason?
Yeah, basically my biggest thing is I want to just see some of the starters get a little bit of playing time, but I definitely don't want to see any injuries. That's the big thing. But again, also you mentioned Jihad Ward. I really want to see him this week as well. The last few weeks that I've been saying the guys that I wanted to watch play, they appear to be listening to me because they keep balling out whenever I say. So hopefully Jihad Ward has a little bit of playing time this Thursday and does a little bit more, because I really think this guy is a very raw talent that has plenty of ability to make this roster and do some great things. So again, that's what I'm looking for this week. I just really hope the Colts go out there, play a game, don't have any severe injuries, and everything just goes smoothly.
Thanks, guys, for listening. I know this is kind of a shorter podcast, but there's not a whole lot to look for right now. I think the roster is pretty set. And if you listen to my interview last week, or my conversation with Zack Paschal of The Athletic, he really kind of talked about how the Colts have basically almost all of their roster spots pretty much locked at this point. Like I think he said 50 of 53 or something like that. So those final couple roster spots I really will think will be determined. And some of those positions probably that we talked about would be determined for this game. And so, yeah, so just I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update on what's to come for this week on the podcast. It's kind of a little bit different. I totally didn't even realize the Colts were playing the Bengals on Thursday, a really early game. And so that kind of screwed up our schedule a little bit. This will be coming out tomorrow, but on Tuesday we dropped our recap / players who stood out, which was also kind of combined with our weekly podcast. We always try to drop our weekly podcast on Tuesday, and so we dropped that yesterday. You should definitely give that a listen. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Derek and I talked about that yesterday, and I'm actually I had Zach Hicks on Tuesday night, and we are going to talk about some interesting Colts topics as well. And then Derek is going to drop his latest episode, his second installment of the Hold Your Horses segment later this week, and we'll give you guys an update when we'll officially drop that. But yeah, those are a few things coming up on the podcast, and then we're going to get all geared up for the regular season. It's coming very, very quickly. So thank you guys for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Be sure to follow Derek at Derek_larger, at me, and you can follow me at CPFelger55. And be sure to also follow our podcast at Cody Felger Pod for the latest Colts news. Thank you, guys. We really appreciate all your support, and go Colts.